You've probably already been taught the basics of photosynthesis, how plants use carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight to produce sugar and oxygen. But photosynthesis is a lot more complicated than that. There are two parts, the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. Both parts take place in the chloroplasts of plants. For time's sake, we will only go over the light-dependent reactions, which start the process. The light-dependent reactions take place in the thylakoid membrane. Chloroplasts contain chlorophyll, a pigment that absorbs sunlight. This pigment is found in the photosystems of the light-dependent reactions. Photosystems are membrane-bound proteins that are kind of like warehouses. We start in photosystem 2. The chlorophyll in the system absorbs the sunlight and the energy is transferred to electrons from water. The electrons get excited and jump to a higher energy level. It is important to note that we get the electrons from water through photolysis. In photolysis, sunlight that plants absorb splits water in half. As a result, oxygen and hydrogen ions are formed. Oxygen is a waste product, but the hydrogen ions will be important later. These electrons get trapped by a primary electron acceptor and are then transported in an electron transport chain. The electron acceptors are like trains that transport people, and the whole chain is like a system of trains. The electrons fall from a higher level to a lower level of energy, releasing it. Remember the hydrogen ions? They end up outside of the thylakoid when the water was split, so they need to get pumped back inside. The concentration of hydrogen ions outside is greater than the amount inside, so energy needs to be used to pump the hydrogen ions into the space. The energy the electrons released pumps hydrogen ions in, but only so they can go right back out. They diffuse out through ATP synthase, which is a membrane-bound protein that acts like a wheel in a factory. The ATP synthase turns and ADP gets converted to ATP. ADP is like the uncharged battery version of ATP. After the electrons have returned to a lower state of energy, they continue on through the photosynthesis process through an electron transport chain. The electrons then get to photosystem 1. When sunlight reaches the chlorophyll in photosystem 1, the electrons get excited again. These electrons can go back and be used at ATP synthase to create more ATP, or they can move on to an electron carrier called ferredoxin. From here, they reach an enzyme called NADP+ reductase. This enzyme passes the energized electrons to NADP+. NADP+ is like an uncharged battery for NADPH. With the energy from the electrons, NADP+ becomes NADPH. NADPH is the last electron acceptor in the light reactions. The energy from ATP and NADPH is very important because it will be used to create glucose in the light-independent reactions. The light-independent reactions are also known as the Calvin-Benson cycle. This part of photosynthesis is the cycle that goes through the process of rearranging molecules to create G3P. One of these molecules will leave the Calvin cycle. It will get used to produce glucose. The Calvin cycle has to happen 6 total times in order to create just one molecule of glucose. So yes, photosynthesis is pretty inefficient, but it is a necessary part of life. It gives us the energy we need to survive, and now you know how part of it works.